Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here. I'm just thrilled, and thanks for staying till the very end. As Vince said, I'm the Mission Operations Manager, better known as Mom. So if you hear that in some of the videos, you know what they're referring to. And I'm going to talk to you today about the engineering aspects of the New Horizons mission, the mission to Pluto System. So I have a little bit of science, but mostly it's engineering that I'm going to be talking about. And our first visits to the planet started in 1962 with the visit to Venus. And then our last visit before Pluto was in 1989 with Neptune. And these pictures that I'm showing of Mercury and Venus were actually taken with those spacecraft that made that first visit. And then these next pictures are from the Hubble Space Telescope, which is the best telescope that we have here on Earth. And so these are what the Hubble sees. Now Pluto, you've seen this before in previous presentations, so this is the best picture we had of Pluto before New Horizons visited. And that was a huge reason why we wanted to go, because we knew that Pluto was very, very interesting. But there were some challenges involved. Number one, was funding. We had a mission that was going to take a long time, and even if you have a very agile team, a small team, over that number of years, the cost was going to be high. But 2001, we put together a proposal with SWIRI, Southwest Research Institute. That's where Alan is from. He's the mission PI. And with the Applied Physics Laboratory, which is where I work. The Applied Physics Laboratory was charged with doing the design, build, test, launch, and operations. And we got funded for that mission, and we started that design development in 2002. We launched January 19th, 2006. We flew by Jupiter, used Jupiter as a gravity assist. It only took us 13 months to get there. That was in 2007, February of 2007, and then on to the Pluto system with the encounter in July of 2015. So there were a number of challenges that we needed to overcome engineering-wise before we could make this mission possible. And one of those big things that we needed to overcome was power. At the distance Pluto is from the sun, solar panels weren't really that viable an option. So we went with a nuclear power, an RTG, radio thermoelectric generator. And this is what Voyager used, Galileo used. And historically, this type of power source takes a lot of time to get through the approval process of our government. It has to be signed off by the White House. One of the things this mission had going for it was the mission design people thought we didn't have to do a swing by of Earth. So that made the approval process a little bit more straightforward. Many of the outer missions had to use Earth as a flyby, and so essentially you have to get approval to launch the first time, and then they had to make sure that if you're coming back to Earth that it was also safe. So we met that challenge. Distance, our primary mission was almost a decade after we launched, so that was going to be a challenge, especially when you're putting together a team that had to stay together for that long. Also, the communications. When we reached closest approach with Pluto, our round-trip light time was a little less than 9 hours. So that was a challenge that we needed to meet. And one of the things that we did in operations is we tried to make everything execute out of memory and only do real-time commanding. Now, that's commanding that as soon as the spacecraft receives it, it acts upon it. We tried to only do that, we minimized that amount of real-time commanding. Durability, we needed a spacecraft that could pretty much take care of itself. So if something went wrong, that spacecraft knew how to save itself and wait for a command from Earth. Now that works in all these many years of journey to the Pluto system, except when you get to Pluto and you have this one chance to get it right. So when we were in this 7-day period from July 7th to July 16th, if the autonomy system on board, and that's the system that monitors the fault state of the spacecraft, we would put that spacecraft in what we call encounter mode. And what that does is that software, if it detects a fault on the spacecraft, it wouldn't put that spacecraft into a safe state. And for safe state, for New Horizons, means that you spin up the spacecraft, meaning you can't take any pictures, and you point it to Earth, so you're not taking any science. But in this 7-day period, that software was programmed to fix any fault as best it could and then pick up with the next observation. So that's how we met that challenge. The team was very important to put together. We needed to have a team that was committed to the goal. Now, that wasn't too hard because we're going to Pluto after all, and who gets a chance to go to Pluto in your lifetime? Not very many people. One of the things that I wanted is I wanted a lot of different experience. I didn't want everybody to have the same background. So we had aerospace engineers, electrical engineers, I had an astronomer, I had even a guy that was majored in political science. So we had a diversity of experience. And the reason why that was very, very important is because we knew that we were going to have challenges, we were going to encounter problems, and I needed people that could come to the table with a variety of different solutions. And that meant that we had to have people with different backgrounds who approached those problems in different ways, because many times what you think might be the obvious solution is not necessarily the best solution. So that was extremely important. We needed to have a lot of respect among team members, a lot of listening. And the other thing we wanted to do is we wanted to have a variety of years of experience. So we needed to have people that were well-seasoned. We needed to have people in their mid-careers. And we also needed to have young people because they brought a lot of new ideas to the trade space. And also, we wanted to train the next generation of operators. We wanted to have that forward thinking going on. Contingency plans, we needed to think about those things. We needed to think outside of the box. What could happen? Go through those paper exercises, and in those contingencies that we thought were high risk and might take a lot of time to develop, we actually developed procedures for those in the event we had experienced those. So our role as mission operators, we take care of the spacecraft. We ensure that it's healthy and that it's safe. We also develop those commands or instructions that are sent to the spacecraft, and we work with the scientists and the subsystem engineers on what they want to observe, or if they want to calibrate their instruments, if they want to check out their redundant side, and we translate those desires into commands on the spacecraft. We test those on the ground, we verify, we have a number of different simulators on the ground. We have software simulators, we have hardware simulators. We just want to make sure that anything we send to that spacecraft accomplishes the goal that we set out that it's intended to do. We receive the telemetry or the data from the spacecraft, and we send those commands up or instructions to the spacecraft. We also maintain the ground configuration so that we establish that communication handshake between the ground system and the spacecraft. Very important. So we have a lot of system knowledge of the ground components and also the deep space network components, which is the antenna system we use to communicate with the spacecraft. And in the event that something goes wrong, we are the team that leads that effort to recover the spacecraft. Our spacecraft is the size of a baby grand piano. That, just to give you an idea, that antenna dish is 2.1 meters in diameter. And when we launched this spacecraft, we had about 240 watts of power. When we got to Pluto, we had 201 watts of power. So we had to build this spacecraft components to be very energy efficient. And we have 7 science instruments on board the spacecraft. And if you were to take all those science instruments and turn them on at the same time, which we don't do because they share channels to the recorder, but if you were, they would only take 30 watts total. So it's a very power-efficient spacecraft. When we launched our spacecraft in 2006, Pluto was a planet.
Still is.
Classified by the IAC, Pluto was a planet. Charon was the moon, and still is the moon. And Nixon Hydra had just been discovered in 2005. And going with the theme of Pluto being the god of the underworld, the moons were named according to that same theme. This is launch.
7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have a
Here we go! I can see it!
So this was quite an event for everyone, especially the rocket manufacturers and the people who put together that spacecraft. But if you work in mission operations, you're sort of celebrating, but not really wholeheartedly yet, because you know that there's a chance that your spacecraft may not survive that violent launch event. And so for New Horizons, we had a 50-minute outage after launch. So we were in the operations center, and we had to wait 50 minutes until we got that first burst of telemetry from the spacecraft. And that's when we actually applauded and did our high fives. You've heard previous speakers talk about how fast our Atlas V left Earth. It's still the fastest man-made object left from Earth. 36,000 miles per hour. We got to Jupiter in 13 months. It took Galileo 4 years to get there. That's a little bit of a cheat because it's an orbiting mission, so a little bit of an unfair comparison, but just to give you an idea of how fast the rocket was going. We had a near-perfect injection to our trajectory, which is extremely important because we only had a limited amount of propellant on board, so this was fantastic to us. It allowed us to perhaps do more observations that we had planned or have a more detailed extended mission, so it was just wonderful. And so even though we were left Earth very, very fast, it still took us 9.5 years to reach closest approach with the Pluto system. Then, August 2006, just 8 months after we'd launched, Pluto was redefined as a dwarf planet. And I will not belabor this point. Many people have previous to me have, and very good arguments. Suffice it to say that when I got questions, well, are you going to turn the spacecraft back or go somewhere else? We said no. We still want to go to Pluto. So Jupiter, we took advantage of Jupiter in a couple of different ways. We used Jupiter as a gravity assist for our spacecraft. We were able to shorten that transit time by about 3 years. We also used it to calibrate our science instruments and to check out all those processes that have to work on the ground to make everything, all those science observations possible. So it was wonderful for us. Now, the first thing you do when you launch a spacecraft is you commission it. And normally that's about 30 days for your subsystems. And then the instruments, that varies a little bit. For our instruments, we actually couldn't do the calibration of those instruments until the summer after we launched, so about 6 months afterwards. And that was because those instruments were developed for the lighting conditions on Pluto, and we did not want to open up those shutters when we were too close to the sun. So we had to be very careful with that. We actually didn't finish commissioning the spacecraft till about October 2006. And here we are very close to our Jupiter encounter. So we immediately, from calibration, turned our attention towards planning observations of Jupiter. We actually started those observations in January of 2007, with our closest approach loads being towards the end of February and the very first part of March. And if you know anybody in operations, or you're yourself in operations, you know that we try to plan as far in advance as possible. So we'd actually been planning those close to Jupiter observations probably in the January, December timeframe. And we got a message from the Hubble Space Telescope that said, hey, there's something going on Io. Are you guys planning to take a look? And we were. Our scientists had, they were going to image all those moons. And so when we got to Io, this is what we saw. And so this is still the best ever view of an extraterrestrial volcano. It's just huge. So that hot interior material is coming up from Io, and then it hits that cold space and freezes into boulders. And so what you're seeing is essentially boulders raining down on the surface of Io. And then more moons got discovered. So 2011, Kerberos, and I have to say that the scientists were extremely excited. The engineers were excited, but not quite as much. And then in 2012, we had Styx discovered, and then the scientists actually, they started to, side with the engineers, like, oh no, do we have some kind of debris field? Are there moons that we don't know about in this system? Maybe we better start thinking of planning an alternate sequence when we get to that flyby of Pluto, that 7-day sequence, so that we can safe that spacecraft in the most treacherous part of its journey. So we, besides developing, with a very small team, developing that 9-day sequence for closest approach, once we had that one pretty much in the bag, then we turned our attention to developing the same time period for an alternate sequence, just in case our scientists or the Hubble Space Telescope discovered more moons or debris in the path. And the idea there was we would take our nominal sequence with the best observations in it, and there was this 4-hour period that we thought would be the most treacherous as we go through the Pluto system. We would take that huge antenna on the spacecraft and we use it as a shield, and we'd move through the Pluto system like this, protecting that spacecraft from very minute debris. There was nothing we could do for the big things. So we also, remember we talked about developing contingency plans, those things that you don't want to think about happening, but you have to be ready or prepared in case they do. So one of the things that we did is all mission operations centers have a prime and a backup. And so ours was on one part of the campus, and then totally separate across the street, we had a backup mission operations center. But for this once-in-a-lifetime flyby, for this 9-day sequence that we had, we actually stood up a remote mock, which was at JPL. And the idea was, and it was just to protect this 9-day flyby sequence. The plan was that if we couldn't get the sequence up using our prime or backup mission operations center because of some catastrophic event on the East Coast, we would put 3 or 4 people, 3 or 4 mission operations people in a van, which we had reserved. We had 2 drivers on standby. We'd put them in the van, and they would start driving across country because we couldn't count on the airlines being up. And we figured it would take them about 3 days to get to California, and we would put up that sequence using the remote operations center, and we'd still be able to accomplish those primary goals of the mission. So that just gives you a flavor of the extent we thought about these things. We had an emergency control center stood up at the Goldstone DSN complex, and that was for in case something happened to JPL. We could move, JPL's operations could move to this emergency control center, or ECC. Hardware simulators, we were very lucky to have 2 of them. Because of our duration of our mission, we were able to get funded for 2, and our plan was always to cannibalize equipment from one of them in the event something stopped working. But actually what happened, and if I don't talk about it when I get there, please remind me, but we had an anomaly, or Houston, we have a problem, event that happened on July 4th, and this second hardware simulator played a huge role in the recovery of the spacecraft. For power for our Mission Operations Center, we have our commercial power, then we have backup power, which means that we have a generator on the roof of the building. For this 9-day period, we actually rented a flatbed truck that had a generator on it. So if those 2 things failed, we had a 3rd option. And we talked about the alternate set of commands that we could load in case our hazard team found a new moon or any debris. So we use Deep Space Network as our communication with the spacecraft. There are 3 complexes around the world: Goldstone, California, Madrid, Spain, and Canberra, Australia, approximately 120 degrees apart, so that as your spacecraft moves away from Earth and the Earth rotates, you can use one of those complexes to maintain contact with your spacecraft. And just to give you an idea, and I know I'm speaking to a very informed audience, so this is probably second nature to you, but we, in mission operations, you have to think ahead and you have to think in the future. And this is sort of an example of how that thinking works. So you have your ground antenna, and it's going to be receiving data from the spacecraft. You have commands that are executing out of spacecraft memory that are tagged with time. So as the spacecraft clock reaches that time, those commands will execute out of memory. So if you want to get telemetry from your spacecraft, you actually have to plan those commands on board the spacecraft to start executing a one-way light time before, sending that data before your ground antenna is ready to receive. So this is the example here. We're sending telemetry from the spacecraft, and that ground antenna, it's still quite a ways away. The example I'm using here is on encounter day, closest approach day, when our one-way light time is 4 hours and 25 minutes. So as that telemetry makes its way down to Earth, to the ground antenna, that spacecraft is moving across the sky. And so finally, you get that telemetry on the ground, but yet your spacecraft has moved almost 140,000 miles in distance from where you started. Likewise, if you want to send something, information, commands to the spacecraft, you have to point your ground antenna to where the spacecraft is going to be a one-way light time later. And so that's how this works. So these are just some of the challenges that we faced. One of the enabling concepts that we used on New Horizons is this concept of beacon hibernation. We have the autonomy system that's tied into the RF system. We put the spacecraft into a spin-stabilized mode. We rotate at 5 RPM. And we point that antenna on the spacecraft to where Earth is going to be when we want to wake up. And so as when we put this spacecraft, we call it asleep, the Earth will move towards where that antenna is pointing, so that when we wake up the spacecraft, that we get the highest, we have that high gain antenna pointed directly to Earth, and we can get the highest data return. We were able, because we were able to do this, we saved lifetime on components on the spacecraft. We turned the GNC system off, and we just let this pretty much just drift into the field of view. We had 18 periods of this hibernation, and we woke the spacecraft up for the final time prior to closest approach on December 6, 2014. And our hibernation periods ranged from 36 to 202 days. The other thing this did is it minimized our contact time that we used on the deep space antennas. If you guys you know how many missions the DSN is actually managing or supporting in communications, there's a lot of them. So we were only using a beacon contact once a week, and it was for an hour and a half. And then every month we had a telemetry contact where we would have the spacecraft send the most critical engineering data from each component to Earth. And that way the subsystem engineers, the instrument engineers, could monitor the state of the spacecraft in a very benign and unobtrusive way. This is what the Pluto system looked like in January of 2015. It's very, very small, very, very far away, very small. If you look real closely, you can see that there's a slight wobble here. You're seeing Pluto in the center and Charon revolve around it. And there's a little bit of a wobble, and that's because of the barycenter is outside the surface of Pluto. And this is an optical navigation measurement. So our navigators took these measurements on approach to make sure that we were on the right path to encounter the Pluto system at a particular point in time, so many miles above the surface of Pluto. And so they took these pictures against the known star field, and then they would analyze them when they got them to the ground, and they would let operations know if we needed to correct our path in any way. We also had what we call the hazard team, and these guys were looking for moons or debris in the Pluto field system. And so we took pictures along our path just to see if we could see anything. So the bright image is what the unprocessed image looks like when it comes down from the spacecraft. Then we have the processed image, and then the hazard team would overlay the known objects of the system and see if they could see anything different. So this is what their work looked like and what they were doing. And so we had a number of these observations on approach, and they would alert operations if they saw anything that would cause, I should say operations and navigation, if there was anything that caused them concern that we might need to alter our path for. In April, this is what the Pluto system looked like. And so you can see that blobby picture is actually starting to be more defined in terms of the light and the dark. The bottom picture is May. And so you can see now there's a lot of separation between Pluto and Charon. And then in June, you can see these series of pictures, how Pluto is being resolved. Our final trajectory correction maneuver was done on June 30th. At the time, we didn't know it was our final one. We had one more opportunity on July 4th. But that correction maneuver we did on the 30th of July, after the guidance and control and navigation team, mission design team looked at that, they said it's perfect. You don't need to do the one on July 4th. So, in operations, that's fantastic, because every time you fire those engines, you take a little bit of a risk. By January 1st, the hazard team had gotten their last images down, looking for any hazards in our path. And on the 2nd, they said, we don't see anything, so you're clear to load that best observation sequence. So that made operations and the scientists extremely happy. Our first opportunity to load that sequence to the spacecraft was on July 4th. And the reason why it was so close to the start date of this encounter sequence, which was July 7th, was because it took up so much memory of the spacecraft, we had to wait until that memory became free on board before we could actually put it up to the spacecraft. So on July 4th, about 4:30 in the morning Eastern time, we started radiating those commands to the spacecraft. It took 2 hours for us to radiate those commands at 2,000 bits per second. So again, almost 4.5 hours for commands to get from Earth to the spacecraft. And then another 4.5 hours before we can actually see the spacecraft receiving those commands. So about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, there were 5 of us in the operations center, and we were watching these commands get received by the spacecraft. At 1:54, we lost communication with the spacecraft. Completely silent. So here we are, no pressure. We've flown pretty much 9 years without anybody, really paying attention to what we were doing. And now, we're 3 days away from this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see Pluto, and we have lost contact with our spacecraft. So as mission operators, we know that, one of the most complicated things is the ground system. So we started checking that. We were actually up with Canberra Station. We asked them to check everything to make sure everything was good. And the answer came back that, yeah, everything's good. So starting to sink in that we're experiencing a real problem on the spacecraft. And we're all human. You will allow yourself that 10, 20 seconds of feeling just horrible. And then, you've got a job to do. You've got to get the team back thinking about how to fix this, how to get contact with that spacecraft, and not trying to figure out, oh my gosh, what did I do wrong? We don't have time for that. So that's what we did. My chief planning engineer, Carl Wittenberg, and if Mary Lou is in the audience, bravo to Carl and your teaching. He started talking to our flight software guy. That's the guy that wrote the software in the main computer. I was talking to the autonomy subsystem engineer, the guy that coded the fault analysis, and I said to him, tell me, given what we were doing, tell me the most plausible fault conditions we could be in. Don't tell me all of them. Just tell me the most plausible ones. And he said, okay, there's 2. One of which we've seen before in our long flight to Pluto, and one of which we have not seen in flight. But obviously we thought about it because we coded that software to react to it. So I said, okay, tell me how long before that autonomy system would reconfigure the RF system to start putting a signal out from the spacecraft for each of those conditions. And he said, for the one that we have experienced before, it would be 108 minutes. For the one we haven't ever experienced in flight, it'd be 55 minutes. Looked at the wall clock, we were 60 minutes into not having any contact with our spacecraft. I asked our flight controllers, and these are the people who interface with the Deep Space Network operators, said, please ask Canberra Station to reconfigure the RF to receive this type of signal. And at 3:11 p.m. in the afternoon, we locked up to that signal. It was a huge sense of relief, but that quickly turned to, oh my gosh, we've got a lot of work to do before we can recover this spacecraft. What had happened was we had sent the main computer 2 very intense instructions, and they happened to hit the computer at the same time. One was coming from memory, one was coming from the ground. And it caused the processor to lag behind, so it had trouble servicing the request. The autonomy system sensed that, and it thought something was wrong with the main computer, so it switched to the backup computer. And when it does that, it puts the spacecraft into a safe mode, which means it spins up that spacecraft. You're no longer in a mode where you can take any pictures. And you're at your lowest bit rate. You're at 10 bits per second. So we had our first anomaly review meeting. This is where we call in the whole team and tell them what's going on and start planning a way forward. We had that first meeting at 4 p.m. So that's not a lot of time. That's 45 minutes approximately before we convene that first meeting. By 10:30 in the evening, we had a plan, and we started testing that plan. And remember I talked about those 2 hardware simulators that we were very fortunate to have? We divided up our recovery plan into 3 round-trip light time groups. And the reason why we had 3 is because we only had 4 round-trip light times between when we thought we would send those commands and that July 7th time frame when that sequence would start. So we planned it to take 3 round-trip light times, and we had this 4th one as a spare in case something unexpected happened. We were testing that first part on one of our simulators. We were testing the next part of it on the other simulator. We were using absolutely every resource that we had to get this spacecraft recovered. So over the course of the next 3 days, we did recover that spacecraft. We had 4 hours to spare, meaning that we got that spacecraft back into what we call 3-axis mode, or the imaging mode. And that flyby sequence engaged on time at about 4:30 Eastern on July 7th. And from the pictures that you guys have seen, you know how successful that was. So we did lose some science. We lost about 30 observations, but none of that was critical. And we went on to collect some very good pictures of Pluto and its system. So while this flyby sequence was 9 days long, the most precious science is actually collected in the very closest part of this encounter. And so this is what I'm showing on the screen now. It's that 24 hours of this intense observation period. And with our spacecraft, you cannot communicate with Earth and take pictures or science observations at the same time. And this is because we built the spacecraft to be very robust. We didn't want to have any moving parts. So that meant in order to observe something, you had to take and point the whole spacecraft if you wanted to do something. So our last contact before we went into this very intense 22-hour science observation campaign was on July 13th, right about 9 o'clock in the evening. And we had about an hour and a half of contact with the spacecraft where we could check and make sure everything was okay. We got a last image down, and then we flew through the Pluto system. And so Pluto is inclined on the solar ecliptic, so that's why you see us kind of piercing that. The red is the trajectory of the spacecraft. And during these periods where you see that those long bars, those are the occultations. So the one that's kind of yellowish is the occultation. So where that fuzzy yellow part intersects the red trajectory, that's the occultation with Pluto. And then up above, you see there's an occultation with Charon. So while we didn't have any telemetry from the spacecraft, we were in the operations center. We started about 1 in the morning on July 14th, sending uplink signals with the DSN. We were doing this radio science experiment. We were looking for an atmosphere. We didn't end those uplinks until about 6 in the morning. And then our contact with the spacecraft to see that if it survived this whole period and if it recorded data actually came July 14th, just a little bit before 9 o'clock. And so this is what the DSN stations looked like. So you can see the different complexes on the vertical, and then you can see the antennas that they have at those complexes. NHPC is the call sign for New Horizons. And you can see that of those 13, New Horizons was using 7 of them. So this is a video. I know I've talked to a few of you who were actually at the Applied Physics Lab during this this contact that we accomplished after it flew by the Pluto system. So I'm going to show a short little clip there. This is the Mission Operations Center. In lock on symbols.
So that's the first step in getting data.
Okay, copy that. We're in lock with telemetry with the spacecraft.
See a lot of green numbers in that one, too.
Yeah, green is good.
Yeah.
You gotta get that, man.
Okay. PI, Mom on Pluto 1. We have a healthy spacecraft. We've recorded data of the Pluto system, and we're outbound for Pluto.
Yeah, that's it.
So, quite a day. So normally we don't have cameras in the Mission Operations Center, but this was a very special occasion. And the decision was made that for good or bad, we wanted everybody to share in either the joy or the sadness, because this is real science and this is real exploration, and we wanted to give that to the world, really. We had people that were joining us from around the world, and it was just truly amazing. These are some of the stills that were taken. After all was said and done, we were aiming for a point at a particular time in space. That point that we were aiming for was 7,800 miles above the surface of Pluto. We arrived at that point approximately 83 seconds early and 50 miles low. And this was all from 9.5 years and 3 billion miles. So kudos to the navigation team. The picture from Hubble, and then this, of course, is what we saw. So. And you've also seen this one. This has got to be one of my very favorite pictures. Water ice mountains, methane frost fields, haze in the atmosphere, craters. It's just an amazing place. And we even have evidence of icebergs. And Charon, what a spectacular moon. If you heard Dr. Stern talk yesterday, you know that crevice across or canyon across Charon is believed to be the result of an underground ocean early in its life, that as the moon cooled, it expanded when it froze and created this crack or chasm across. The red part on the top is believed to be some sort of transfer mechanism from Pluto over to Charon, but because Charon has no atmosphere, it gets stuck there. It's called tholins. The moons, very odd little moons. And then, of course, people from around the world, newspapers, tweets, just an amazing response. And it just goes to show you that I think exploration and curiosity is just something deep in our soul that touches us, touches all of us, no matter where you live or what profession you're in. We even got a tweet from the president, which we thought was pretty cool. And then looking back on Pluto, yes, the sky is blue. It's almost like Pluto was saying, in your face. You know? And where are we going now? In the fall, last fall, we actually burned our engines and targeted 2014 MU-69, and we're hoping that we can name it, give it a better name. We were approved by NASA to do that, and that's because if we did it early or in the fall, we could save that, some amount of that propellant. If you burn early, you save some propellant. And we are submitting the proposal for the extended mission the 15th of April, and we will find out in June, hopefully, whether or not we'll be funded to actually take pictures, because the spacecraft's going to go by. Whether or not we are funded to take pictures and collect data remains to be seen. And because we're so very far away and we collected so much data at the Pluto System, it'll take us till end of October, end of November before we get it all down. This website is public. You can go to it and you can look to see what new images or new data has come down. I encourage you all to do that. Thank you.
The telescope has revolutionized the human experience countless times since its creation some 400 years ago. Celestron is doing our part to continue the evolution of the telescope and expand the horizons of the human mind. For decades, Celestron has been committed to providing individuals with high-quality telescopes and optical instruments at affordable prices. We strive to clear the way for intellectually curious people around the globe to experience and explore deeper into nature and the cosmos.
When I think of Celestron, I automatically think of the people. To me, a company is people. We have people that are passionate about what they do, and we have extremely talented individuals that work for this company. And I think it takes those intangibles to create great product.
Founded in 1960 in Los Angeles, California, Celestron has been an industry leader in telescopes for over 50 years. As the world's largest telescope brand, we continue to develop technological innovations that set the pace of the industry. Celestron is synonymous with inspired design and state-of-the-art technologies. As an industry leader, we strive to remain the world's most innovative telescope brand. As a rapidly growing outdoors company, Celestron focuses on products that enhance the exploration of the great outdoors. As a champion of STEM education and the arts, we pursue the advancement of public scientific understanding. Our long-standing track record supporting astronomy, education, and outdoor-related nonprofits across the globe speaks to the values we hold dear. Celestron is committed to encouraging the exploration of our natural world in fun and unique ways.
There's like a lifetime of good memories at Celestron. It's probably one of our star parties. I'd say probably at the Badlands, when we had in the middle of nowhere a crowd of hundreds of kids coming off of school buses, coming up and observing the sun for the very first time through a telescope.
I've had so many amazing experiences here at Celestron, from helping assist with the setup of equipment with Stephen Hawking to the very humbling experience of a standing ovation after we announced to teachers at the National Science Teacher Convention that we were donating the binoculars to them.
One that definitely stands out as kind of an achievement in my career was when we launched the CEVO telescopes, the Celestron Evolution. That was a really proud moment for me to be able to look at the people that I've essentially had grown up with and spent my career and be sort of at the pinnacle of achievement and being able to sort of unveil that and communicate that to all these people that I highly respect and have worked with a long time.
One of the things that makes a company great is great employees. We just strive to push the envelope to really accommodate the needs of our customers. Those are the keys to what drives Celestron and what makes us successful.
Our goal is to inspire a sense of wonder, curiosity, and fun in our communities and throughout our company. We desire to be a vehicle that helps drive humanity's insatiable desire to know the universe.
My vision for Celestron would be taking all those qualities that the company's built upon and taking them into the future, into the next generation. And so we need to be continually evolving as a company.
As someone that's been in this industry a long time, I do think that Celestron's best days are now, and the even better days lie right ahead of us.
We dedicate our work to opening the eyes of the people around the world and enhancing their view of the cosmos, into the past and on to the future.